To our 18th annual Women for Women breakfast. I say to colleagues sometimes, we were doing women's initiatives before women's initiatives were cool. And I'd like to recognize Pam Colcott, who is sitting right here. Pam was the initiator of the Women for Women initiative 18 years ago, when in fact then the firm was Soberman Eisenbaum Columbia. And Pam had the foresight to realize that getting a group of dynamic women together, even at this time of the morning, would create some really good energy and synergy. So we're really happy she had that vision. So I'm delighted to see so many of you here. This is our largest turnout yet. We get bigger and bigger, which is terrific. We'll be in the Metro Convention Center in a couple of years. I'm certain that we're going to have a lively and stimulating discussion of Sheryl Sandberg's best-selling book, Lean In. I returned from the meeting of our annual affiliation in South America last week, and people from 60 or 65 countries, and everyone, men and women, had heard of the book and were talking about the book and had opinions about the book, even if they hadn't read the book, which I thought was interesting. And I'm pretty sure that many of you had to do a little bit of extra leaning in to get here so early this morning, so I thank you for that. So I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of introducing our panelists and our moderator today. So first, I'm introducing my friend Clare Beckton. Clare was leaning in before it became this year's global tagline for female professionals asserting themselves in the business world. She's a former deputy head of Status of Women Canada and assistant deputy attorney general. She's accustomed to keeping her hand up in order to be heard. Having worked in several high-profile and high-pressure public positions before founding the Carleton University Centre for Women in Politics and Public Leadership, Clare's no stranger to speaking up as a believer in equity and advancing women's leadership in Canada. She's a noted diversity champion, a two-time recipient of WXN's Canada's Most Powerful Woman Top 100 Award, and in 2008, the Federated Press recognized Clare as the Woman of the Year, and she was awarded a Canada 125 medal, which is in addition to many other awards that she has received. She's a Fulbright scholar. She holds an MPA from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and in recognition of her academic excellence and contributions to public service and leadership, she was awarded the Litauer Fellowship in 2005. She's a member of the Harvard's Women's Leadership Board, in addition to many committee and board seats she fills, and she continues to lead the charge for policies that increase access for women to positions of influence. She also offers a series of workshops entitled Owning Your Own Success for women wanting to lean in, but her warning is it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter, and she certainly accomplished that. So we're very fortunate to welcome Clare Beckton to our stage. It's also my pleasure to introduce you to Robin Taube. Robin is a financial literary consultant, speaker, and blogger. She's a chartered accountant, now a CPA, and the best-selling author of A Parent's Guide to Raising Money-Smart Kids. That might come about 10 years late for me, but I may be a... Robin is passionate about improving opportunities for women to advance into positions of leadership in the accounting profession and beyond, and she's the chair of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada Women's Leadership Council. She's been on the council since its inauguration in 2008, and she took over as chair in 2011. She's an avid cyclist, snowboarder, music lover, concert goer, and is the mother of 2 teenage children. Robin believes that Lean In is a must-read for every working woman, but especially young women, and she wishes there'd been a book like that when she started her career. So come on up, Robin. Pamela Jeffrey. Pam was inspired to create a network for female leaders back in 1997 because one didn't exist. Since its founding in 97, WXN has grown to 17,500 select women across Canada. In 2003, she founded Canada's Most Powerful Women Top 100 Awards, which is now Canada's most prestigious awards for female leaders. In 2008, WXN was launched in Ireland, and I understand Pam just returned from Ireland and meeting with the women there, with a first step towards creating an international community of female leaders. In 2012, we were so delighted that Pam was recognized as the only resident Canadian named as a charter member of Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women, which recognized 60 women globally, including Hillary Clinton and Melinda Gates, for their dedication to changing the lives of women and girls. In 2009, she founded the Canadian Board Diversity Council with a mandate from the federal government to increase board representation of women, members of visible minority groups, Aboriginal peoples, including First Nations, Inuits, and Métis, and persons with disabilities. Pam's commitment to community service is extensive. She's well-versed in corporate governance in the public and not-for-profit sector, having served on 11 public sector and nonprofit boards, 11 advisory boards and committees, and 4 nominating and governance committees. She currently serves as a member of the federal government's Advisory Council for Promoting Women on Boards, the Ivy School of Business Entrepreneurship Council, and is a director of the Hinks Delcrest Foundation. She lives in Toronto with her husband, Norman Inkster, and mother of 2 boys, Stephen and Samuel. And as WXN's founder, her organization inspires smart women to lead. Smart leaders know that leaning into their careers enables them to be more successful. Pam also believes that great leaders need to demonstrate their willingness to lean in to help their mentees succeed in their careers. We're so lucky to have Pam Jeffrey with us this morning.
Thank you.
This is a lot of talking for me on one cup of coffee.
It's a lot.
Finally, we are really, really pleased to have Kym Geddes here. Kym has taken some time away from the newsroom over at News Talk 1010 because there's nothing going on in Toronto, so she thought she'd pop by and chat with us for an hour or so. Award-winning journalist Kym Geddes is proudly the first female news director at Toronto's iconic news radio station, News Talk 1010. In her 25 years of radio broadcasting, Kym has had the pleasure of reporting and anchoring the news at B101 FM Barrie, formerly CKBB AM 950, KCOC in Hamilton, Q107 and Chum FM in Toronto. It was during her tenure at Chum FM that Kym was the recipient of the Edward B. Murrow Award for news documentary Toronto Under the Gun, which turned the spotlight on a spate of shootings in Toronto in the summer of 2005. For 10 years, she's been a professor and shared her broadcast journalism expertise with students in the radio and television broadcasting programs at Seneca and Humber colleges. She's a natural storyteller, and she's regularly called upon as a keynote speaker and MC for various industry and community events. In her current role as news director, Kym manages a team of broadcast journalists handling the news for 4 Toronto news stations. I'm sure that's easy. And in her spare time, she sits on the board of the directors of the RTDNA. Kym says Sandberg is a rock star and a powerhouse in her own right because she excels at brokering deals and partnerships. She believes Sandberg is a collaborator whose skills not only allow Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg to focus on what he wants, engineering and product development, they also serve to help Facebook's bottom line. She leaned in by identifying the skills needed to make their partnership work and leverage them for the benefit of the company. So I'm really delighted to welcome Kym to our stage. Thank you.
Pardon me?
It is dark up here.
Is.
Let me get situated. If you haven't seen the book, not that Cheryl needs an agent, but this is Lean In, so if you haven't read it yet, that's the book. I thought I'd bring it today if anyone wants to take a look at it. And we will get underway. Everyone has some coffee and maybe some tea, so we're awake, we're ready to go, has something to eat, good stuff. Okay, we're going to get right into the heart of the question and answer session. Oh, and by the way, before we get started, we are on Twitter today, and the hashtag is W4W 2013. So if you want to follow along on Twitter, please feel free. And if you have questions, put them out on Twitter as well. And then at the end of our discussion, we will open the floor to your questions. And there are microphones set up here on each end. And we'll just walk up to the microphone and we'll throw it out to the floor. And you can have your say. So in your introduction, I want to start, Susan mentioned, I want to start with you, Claire. You believe that leaning in just scratches the surface. What are the other issues that you need to be uncovered or addressed in your mind?
Well, I think that lean in did encompass a whole range of issues, but obviously her focus was on women themselves and what they could do to lean into their careers. But in addition to all of that, there's a whole body of research, a whole body of work that focuses around what is the business case for more women in senior level positions? What do corporations, institutions, organizations need to do to try to advance women and change the culture in their organizations? And I think even deeper, why are they not doing it? Even though we know there's a significant and substantial business case that's been laid out by very, very significant companies, well-known companies. You can go from McKinsey to Credit Suisse to Catalyst to the World Bank, where they all show the business case that having more women and diversity means a better bottom line and different, at least different public policy, if not better. We have to do more research around whether that public policy will be better. So I think she's done a great job of focusing in, laying out a general overview of some of the issues, but there's a great deal more research and focus that still needs to be done to move things forward. But she's given it a platform, which is really good.
Well, women in leadership roles is not new, not by a long shot, and we've had strong women in so many different roles, global women, Gloria Steinem, Margaret Thatcher, and Eleanor Roosevelt. So let's get to the heart of this, that a lot of people are saying that Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, is ignited an international movement of feminism, brought feminism again into the mainstream. So I want to go around the panel and ask each and every one of you then, why do you think that Lean In has resonated in the past 2 years or so with an audience? And is it okay, again, to be a feminist and to say the F word? And do you all consider yourselves feminists? So Robin, I want to begin with you.
Well, I think the reason that Lean In has resonated so much is that for a long time we thought that the pipeline would take care of the issue, that there were so many women going into business schools, so many women going into all the professions, and that eventually over time you would start to see the number of women in leadership positions reach levels approaching parity. But that hasn't happened. There's been progress, but it has been really, really slow and disappointing. So I think that there's a lot of interest in understanding why that is. And I think that even in Canada, we're seeing on boards, only about 15% of SP 500 boards are women, and especially in the C-suite, the CEO, CFO, CEO positions, maybe 5 to 10% are held by women. So that answers the question as to why I think it's resonating. Plus Sheryl herself, Sheryl Sandberg, is such a fascinating, compelling person for the reasons Susan mentioned in the introduction. So I think that it's at the right time, and she's written it in such an approachable, easy to read way. In terms of am I a feminist, I would say that I am, but I don't go around with a scarlet F on my jacket because it has this negative connotation. As
Why? Why do you think that is?
So the old school feminism is about being really aggressive and being a bit of a ball buster and a bit of a man hater. And I am none of those things, I can tell you. I just think that women should be treated fairly and that there should be a level playing field. So in that sense, I am completely a feminist. And I also want to empower. I have a daughter, I have a son and a daughter, but I have a daughter. She's at an all-girls school, and her school is all about empowering girls to feel like they can really make a difference in the world. So for all those reasons, I'm a feminist.
Pamela, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Robin. I mean, I do describe myself now as a feminist. When I was growing up, I didn't really think about it that way. And in my 20s, when I was in business school, 40% of the class that I was in during my HBA at Ivy, we were women. And when I finished in '84, I thought that 40% was a really good sign of what I was going to see in the workplace. But I didn't see it. And so I do describe myself as a feminist because it is, as Sheryl writes, and we all know, it's about economic equality, it's about social equality, it's about political equality. And if we believe in equality, then we should call ourselves feminists. But we have a long way to go. And I was reminded in a conversation I had with my 21-year-old son, Stephen, who's at Queen's right now. And I drove up to see him on Thursday night. And we were driving around town. And he said, Mom, you're really good with directions. Get this, for a woman.
Oh!
I almost left the road. I looked at him, I said, Stephen, don't ever qualify by saying to anyone for a woman.
There you go.
Now, he grew up in a household where he's always had a working mom, and he's in a program in university with lots of women, but that's what he said. So it reminded me, we have some ways to go. He would kill me if he knew I was talking about this right now. But we have some ways to go, even with this generation.
So with that story in mind then, Claire, why do you think Lean In has resonated?
I think the timing was really perfect, and the person who wrote it was the perfect person to write it, because she was not a traditional feminist. She came from senior levels of business, and she had also had a TED Talk, which resonated. It followed Anne-Marie Slaughter's article, which got a lot of attention around women can't have it all. But a lot's been going on, as both other panelists have said. Over the last few years, when I was at Status of Women, we realized there was a lot of people who thought equality had been achieved. The numbers simply don't show it. Women have made it to middle management in fairly significant numbers, but they haven't broken through to the senior levels of management. So there was a realization, and all of a sudden, with all the business cases being put out for why women should be there, the time was ripe for a book of this nature. And I think Cheryl was excellent to do it. She was the right person because she had that kind of persona. She had the credibility because of where she sits to be able to be heard, and she could get to the market. So it was really perfect. In terms of being a feminist, I've been a feminist since I think I was 12 years old, or maybe since I was born, because I always rebelled when my mother insisted that I do the work in the house, and two of my three brothers who didn't help on the farm didn't do their share. I would really get angry at her and say, that's not fair. So I started right back then. I went to law school at a time when there were very few women in law school, because I believed it was a route to show that women could advance into positions of power and influence and be able to use that to make a difference in a positive way. So I guess I've always been a feminist, but I've never ascribed myself as someone who hated men. After all, I now have two sons, and like Pamela, I have my challenging moments with my sons when sometimes they say things. But my oldest son fought in Afghanistan with women who were in the infantry. He fought side by side with them. And that was something we fought for in the 1980s. So I was really pleased to hear him say, well, as long as they're competent, I don't care. And he's also, the final straw with him is, he said, I don't care if I have a wife, she earns more than me. I'd be quite happy. I like that.
I want to get into some of the criticisms of the book. As popular as it is, it's also polarizing. And I've read several articles, critics who call it faux feminism, that Sheryl Sandberg is a crock. So I want to get into that. Let's state the obvious, that Sandberg has a Harvard degree. Larry Summers is on her resume. She has money, she has position, and her husband, let's not forget, SurveyMonkey founder David Goldberg. So faux feminism, the critics say what she espouses in this book is too simplistic. So let's start with that. And Robin, I want to start with you. Do you think Sandberg is for real?
Well, I personally can very much relate to her. She's a little bit younger than me, but she grew up in a Jewish upper middle class family with professional parents. I could really relate to her. I also feel like she accomplished everything she did by her own brains and ability. I mean, her father was a doctor. He wasn't in the business world. He certainly wasn't in high tech. So everything she did, every step of the way, getting into Harvard, all of her jobs was just because she is capable and bright and obviously articulate and personal and personable. So I do not agree at all with this faux feminism. I think she's totally the real deal. And that's why I said in my introduction that I wish I had read this book when I was starting my career as a CA, because there's so much good advice in that book. I mean, when I started, I also went to school with, I did commerce at U of T. It was like a 50-50 kind of split. A lot of my classmates were women and men, and I graduated in '87. And then I got to Pete Marwick, which was where I started working. I'm dating myself, because then it became KPMG. And there was like one or two female partners that I could see, no visible role models at all. So I think every lesson, every chapter and every lesson in that book, I wish I had had at the time. I had to figure out a lot of this stuff myself by trial and error, which was why I was so excited to join this Women's Leadership Council when the CPA Canada initiated it, because I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need in our profession. So I don't agree with this book. I'm a real supporter of her and her book.
Well, okay, let me ask you this then, Claire. I mean, for many women, they're seeing Sandberg as, she's a woman of privilege. Let's be honest, she is. And that's not the reality of many women, young women, coming into their careers and trying to work their way up through the ranks. So what do you think of this faux feminism critique?
Well, I think it's the wrong debate to begin with, because I don't think we should be calling someone's feminism faux or otherwise. If you believe in equality, then we're all on the same page. And I think it sort of distracts from what the real message is. Yes, you can call her a woman of privilege, but she became a woman of privilege because she worked hard. She learned things along the way. She didn't start out, yes, she upper middle class. She was more privileged than I was beginning. I came from very humble roots, parents who had a grade 8 and grade 10 education. But I think she did the same thing. She was fortunate to have Larry Summers. There's no question, when you have a mentor and a sponsor like Larry Summers, it's going to help you along your way. But a lot of the messages that she has in the book are applicable whether you're a woman of privilege or otherwise. And like Robin has said, I learned a lot of these things the hard way because I didn't have any real role models, because there were no women when I went through. I was the first woman teaching law in my faculty of 33. I was 24 years old with all of these men. I didn't have any role models, and neither did they, quite honestly. They had no idea how to treat me. Some of them tried to treat me as if I was their daughter, some of them as if I was a girlfriend to be pursued, but most of them had no idea how to do it. And I didn't have any idea. So I think that many of the messages that she has there, you can separate out from the privilege question. Throw out this notion of we should criticize each other because someone's more feminist than someone else. Someone could call, actually I experienced that when just as a last note here, when I was teaching law, one of my areas was freedom of expression. And I was arguing that obscenity should be protected, and then you balance it like you would any other, instead of saying it's not entitled to protection at all. Well, I got attacked by the feminists for saying that. But the very thing that they were attacking me for could be applied equally if you were talking about equality. So I think that it's just the wrong debate. We need to focus on what are the lessons, what is the real issue here, and what can we take out of this.
You mentioned sponsorship and mentorship. We will get into that in a couple questions from now at length, but we will revisit that. But I want to get into question number 3, and this is specifically for you, Pamela. The Ontario Securities Commission has recently announced that it will be employing the comply or explain method in an effort to increase the number of women in senior management positions on boards of Canadian public companies. Is this move beneficial? Is it detrimental to women becoming a respected voice at the boardroom table?
Okay, now I'm going to lean in on this. This is a monumental opportunity for women. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on why I think this is a wonderful, wonderful moment in our history. So right now we know from the research that we're doing that 16% of FP 500 board seats are held by women. The Canadian Board Diversity Council is releasing that research on Monday. So we're starting with 16%. If you drill down and look at board seats on a sector basis, you'll see that in the mining, oil, and gas industries, 9.9% of board seats are held by women. In financial services, 23% of board seats are held by women. So that is the gap, sector by sector by sector. So our analysis points to the reality that the pace of change, as Robin has noted, has been glacial. It's been really, really slow. So what can we do about that? Well, we have 3 options. One is the status quo, which means keep on doing the same thing, keep advocating, making the business case. The second option is quotas. And many countries in Europe have embraced quotas, have put in place legislation, and have brought about 40% of board seats held by women, for example, in Norway. France has quota legislation in place now, and 25% of their public company board seats are held by women. But that's the second option. The third option between status quo and quotas is comply or explain. So what is comply or explain? Comply or explain is an approach whereby companies are encouraged to increase diversity at the board level and in senior management by embracing a board diversity or a management diversity policy. They are encouraged, once they've adopted that policy, to communicate what that policy is on their website to their stakeholder groups, in their annual proxy circular, and in their annual report. So comply or explain is comply with what we're asking you to do by disclosing your diversity policy, including measurable objectives, and report on how you're doing against those objectives. Up to you what those objectives look like. It's your business, so do what makes sense. Or if you're not going to do what I've just described, explain why not. Explain to your shareholders and your employees and others why you're not putting in place a diversity policy. So that is comply or explain. And it's working. So you look at Australia. What's so interesting is that in Australia, like in Canada, so many of their board seats are in the mining industry. Mm-hmm. They started below us 4 years ago when they implemented comply or explain. They're ahead of us now because the peer pressure that was put on companies to explain why they weren't doing anything to tap into the other half of the talent pool, that peer pressure has brought about some really positive changes in Australia with respect to diversity at the board table. And it's brought about similar changes in the UK. So we look at comply or explain as a really good opportunity for Canadian companies to say, this is our opportunity to tap into the other half of the talent pool because we haven't been doing a really good job. The business case is there, and now let's just get on with it.
When we were preparing for this discussion, Pamela, you talked extensively about this as well.
About the comply or explain?
Yeah.
Well, just a couple of things. CPA Canada also responded to the OSC consultation paper, also strongly in favor of comply or explain. What I thought was interesting was that Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, which is one of the largest investors in Canada, they came out saying that they didn't think it went nearly far enough, and they wanted to see something like targets or quotas, and then consequences if you didn't meet those targets or quotas, consequences like fines or delisting. So I found that interesting because I think there was a range of responses, and I think starting from where we began in Canada, comply or explain is a great first step, and I think they thought it was too much to go directly to targets or quotas, but it was interesting that the investor community wanted to see that.
And when we saw the teachers come out with that, we thought that is fantastic, because if a major pension fund like teachers is coming out at that end, and we're advocating for comply or explain with measurable objectives, then we hope that that means that the public is going to support the government directing the OSC to move forward with this in the way that they had contemplated, which was a comply or explain with measurable objectives. We're calling for 15% of board seats to be held by women by, 20% by 2015 and 30% by 2018. So we've put a line in the sand and said this is achievable with comply or explain, and with companies embracing the idea, because it's a cultural shift. And we need a cultural shift, and I don't believe that you can regulate a cultural shift. I think you can put in place regulation to encourage a shift, and if at the end of the day, Robin, we don't hit that 20% and 30%, then I think it's time to take more onerous regulatory
Yeah, because there are
Action.
cultural and social norms
Yeah.
around women's role and women's, women in leadership. So I think those are the things that take time. And as you were saying
Yeah.
with your sons,
Yeah.
you think that the next generation coming up, and I think you do see, they have a more egalitarian view in terms of splitting household chores, in terms of, the next generation, like the X's and the Y's
Yeah.
and the millennials. But
Yeah.
still, it's taking a long time. And I just want to add one more thing about the business case, because I am a CA and I feel like I have to elaborate a little bit more about what that means. So there's been lots of research that shows that there's actual bottom line results to having more diversity, not just gender, but racial, ethnic diversity in leadership, including boards, as well as top management. And that means things like return on equity, return on sales, share price performance. So when we're referring to the business case, we're talking about this isn't just the right thing to do, to be fair. This is the bright thing or the smart thing to do, because it has a bottom line impact, which is good for Canadian growth and prosperity. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, in chapter 2 of Lean In, Sandberg discusses the imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud, feeling like you're going to be discovered, that you don't have what it takes to be at the table. Why do you think women think this way more so than men? I mean, what causes the gender gap? Why is ambitious often considered a derogatory word used to describe a woman, but it's complimentary when we describe a man? So Robin, I'll start with you.
Okay, I'll be quick and pass it to Claire. So again, there are these social and culturally ascribed roles for men and women, these gender stereotypes. And for women, it's to be nurturing and to be nice and to be compassionate and kind. And for men, it's to be decisive and to be aggressive and assertive. When women exhibit more of those characteristically male traits of leadership, they're considered to be less likable. So with their success comes a price of being less likable. And I just was recently reading about this with Janet Yellen, who's the new Fed chairman in the U.S., chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, and they were saying that she lacked a certain gravitas, which was, I think that the innuendo was that she didn't have, enough of these male characteristics, enough assertiveness, aggressiveness. But the double bind, or the double standard applied to women, is that when you assert too much of it, like Hillary Clinton, you're very unlikable.
Yeah. Claire?
I think there's a number of factors that play in. Obviously, the societal norms that exist, which Robin's been talking about, and haven't fully changed to reflect the realities of men and women's lives today, that the majority of women are in the workforce, the majority of men are spending more time than before, although certainly not fully 50%, helping in the home. So there is the societal norms that have not caught up with the reality, and that puts a burden on women. I think it starts right from the time that you have children, because most parents treat their daughters differently than they treat their sons. The daughters are more protected. The sons can go out and do things. I know when I was growing up, my brothers were allowed to go to the next farms or to the neighbors by themselves. I wasn't, because it wasn't safe for a daughter to do that. So in terms of building that courage and that willingness to take risk from an early age, I think there are blocks that stop us from doing that. Now, there are parents, and it's really good, there are parents today that say to their girls, you can do whatever you want to do, obviously, if you add in with the strengths and talents that you have. So many women, and I know I had it too when I was growing up in an environment, I came from a poor family, I certainly had the imposter syndrome. I kept saying, when are they going to find out, even though I'm top of my class and I'm going to graduate school and I've got this great teaching position, when are they going to find out I'm not as smart as they think I am? So, and I've talked to senior women who have it too, and I think it does stem from this whole cultural norms that women traditionally were not in the workplace, were not in these leadership. And society still views leadership through a male model. The notion, what does a leader look like? And they'll point to a strong, confident male. And maybe they'll add charisma. And yet, when you look at many of those people, they make a hell of a lot of mistakes because they don't listen to others. They don't bring in the views. So it's shifting the model. And Hillary Clinton, if you watched the evolution of Hillary Clinton, you watch how it changed till a lot of people in the United States are now saying we wished we had voted for Hillary Clinton. So it is going to take time, and it takes working women themselves working to build that confidence that often is lacking.
Let's talk about the glass ceiling. Sandberg writes that women just need to stop complaining, get on with it, get working hard, get the job done, and own their own success. When we were meeting to discuss what we're going to do here this morning, Claire, you and I were talking, and it's like, what's your background? And I said, well, I've been in news for years. I taught journalism for a couple of years. And now I'm the news director at News Talk 1010. That's about it. And you took me to task and said, own your own success. So is this about good old-fashioned confidence?
It's much more than that, actually. Much more than good old-fashioned confidence. I think it's not just the responsibility of women to make this change, obviously, and I don't think Sheryl Sandberg, even though it may sound like that, suggests that it rests solely with women to make the change. Obviously, there's a lot of responsibility on the part of the corporations and the institutions and society in general to change cultural norms. However, as women, if we want to be successful, we need to define what we mean by success. Not what society defines as success, but what we mean by success. And then we need to own it. And what do I mean by owning it? We need to be responsible for the choices that we make and not let ourselves be victims of a system. And this can happen easily enough. I found when I was in the Department of Justice, many of us women were in victim state. We blamed everybody else for what was happening and why women weren't advancing. Until Barbara Annis came along and said, you guys are all in victim state, and guess what happens when you're in victim state? You lose your power. You have no options, because if it's somebody else's fault, you can't do anything. So take that back. Become empowered and say, I make the choices. I make the choices about how I think. I make the choices in terms of my workplace. And if I do all of the things that are necessary to understand, remembering that today's workplaces were designed by men. And that's not about blaming men, that's simply the reality of the generations that came before us. So a lot of the processes, the way of dealing with things, are male models. So it is, if you're in the workforce now, while the change is happening, you need to understand how that takes place. How do you get into the politics of an organization? How do you work through that? But it's all about saying, I make the choices. And just in 1 second, I'll finish here. When I encountered a situation when I was the deputy head of status of women, which I found untenable, I made the decision that I would leave. I made that choice. I said, I'm not going to be a victim of what's happening. I made the choice to leave, even though I hadn't planned and I didn't have any future plans. Because I said, this is my choice. I will make choices about my future. And that's what owning your success is about.
Okay, Robin, let me continue on with you. Why is it, though, so many women credit others when they're asked about their career success? They initially credit others first without saying, well, wait a minute, I did this. I did the hard work and put that hard work into it as well.
Well, I think one reason is women tend to be more naturally collaborative, so they give credit to their team as opposed to just taking the credit personally and saying, oh, I did this, I did that. So that's one reason. And again, I think when you draw too much attention to yourself, or you feel like you're advocating too much for yourself, you fear what the repercussions are. Again, you think you're going to pay a price for this, that you won't be likable, you may not get promoted. So I think that women tend to downplay it, whereas I think men don't feel uncomfortable saying I.
Let's move into the area of women helping women and the idea of sponsors. Pamela, you were recently quoted in Report on Business magazine on the topic of sponsorship. You define sponsorship as finding someone who will put their neck on the line for you. The guys help the guys, so it's really important that women help other women.
We always talk at WXN about how important it is for women to help other women. It doesn't mean that it's not important for men to help women. It's just a reminder to all of us, mostly women in this room, that we need to help one another more. than we are doing so right now. So when you think about sponsorship and mentorship, for me, sponsorship is about one of us putting our neck out on the line for another one of us in the room. And mentorship being coaching and being a sounding board and encouraging and helping someone through advice and counsel move through their career. So I always distinguish between mentorship and sponsorship. But at the end of the day, sponsorship is when somebody says, Pam, I want to help you get that next consulting assignment, or Pam, I want to help you get in the competition for this assignment. Or I'm going to go and I'm going to speak to the managing partner because I think that you should be promoted to partner. So putting your neck on the line. And I have had, in my career, before I started WXN, I was a lobbyist, and I founded a lobbying firm. And I had a very successful firm in downtown Toronto with a group who I worked with, and we lobbied. And one guy who I'd known for many years, very well-established businessman in the city, was on the board of Tennis Canada. And he said, we are going to build a new facility so we can have world-class tennis in Toronto. And we're going to have a competition and hire a lobbying firm. He went as a board member to the president and CEO of Tennis Canada at that time and said, I want Pam Jeffrey in this competition. Because of my sponsor, I got into the competition, won the competition, and got the money from the federal and provincial governments to build that stadium at York. That is the value of a sponsor. Jim put his neck out for me, and I would encourage all of you to think about putting your neck on the line for someone who you work with, who you believe in. Because if we all do that more, especially when it comes to women, and putting our neck out for women to move into the partner role, into a senior role where that person doesn't have it right now, that's a fantastic way to make change. And it's a fantastic way to live up to Sheryl Sandberg's words of wisdom about leaning in. You're leaning in by helping someone else.
Okay, Claire, let me ask you then, what tangible advice would you give a young woman who's just landed that job in a company, and as part of her goals, she wants the next promotion and move up, but within the first year, seek out a mentor or a sponsor, or what?
I think you can't give a hard and fast advice without knowing the full extent of circumstances. And it's starting with the idea that mentors don't have to be, as Sheryl points out in her book, mentor doesn't have to be someone that you're seeing regularly. You can learn from a variety of people, and it may be one or two encounters. If you look around for people that you see doing well, then you may look for opportunities to approach them and ask them for advice. To say, how did you get where you are? What did you do? What did you find was important? You don't have to go up and say, would you be my mentor? Some cases you might, but a lot of people might find that, unless you have a relationship or you're in a formal mentoring program, might find that a bit off-putting. So it's better to look for people who are being successful. Look around also in your organization for people who are influencers. Who influences what happens in that organization? Because you want to learn and become close to the influencers, because they're the ones that make things happen. And when you look at influence, it's not necessarily related to position. You can have some people who may not be in the highest positions in an organization, and yet they have tremendous influence because of who they are. So you really can look, and it doesn't, when you're looking for mentors or you're looking for people who can help you advance your career, it doesn't have to be women. It can be men or women. Because I know that men have given me good advice because there weren't a lot of women. When I didn't get my first promotion when I was at the university, I was really upset. I mean, it was a case of discrimination, but I couldn't argue against it. But one of my colleagues said to me, look, get upset, do what you have to do. Now show them that they were wrong. Here's what you need to do. And that was really valuable advice. It came, and then I went to my dean and said, I'm going to leave, and he said, no, 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 you can't leave, and I negotiated a higher salary with him. But he was like a sponsor for me, but I think it is really thinking and being strategic about what's happening in the organization and knowing where you want to go in that organization. Because if you want to advance, then you need to talk to people who have been successful, who understand what the culture of that organization is, what's rewarded. So you need to find that out so that you can do the things, if those are the things you want to do, that align with what's being rewarded. I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, and I get asked all the time, and I think it's fantastic. I love it, and I have to say, Pam's absolutely right. As women, we really need to lean into helping other women advance and to connect women, to connect them with each other so that you can build on the strengths that are out there.
Robin, from what I'm hearing, then it sounds like seeking out a sponsor is a job just like your day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, well, what I wanted, it is, and again, it's something that you really have to earn, even more so than asking for a mentor. You cannot say to someone, will you sponsor me? It's your actions speak for themselves, and that's what, another reason why I think Sandberg is so for real, because clearly she proved herself time and time again, which is why people were willing to risk their own personal political capital by recommending her. So the thing about advocacy is, and we said this, women are not so comfortable advocating for themselves. They think if they put their heads down and they work hard, that they're going to be recognized for their accomplishments. And it's so much more than that. So you have to think about your advocate is that person who's in the room when you're not there. That person who's going to say, yes, Janet would be good for that assignment. You need these stretch assignments. You need these high risk. You need to own a P&L in order to advance into leadership roles. And you're not often there when those decisions are being made. So your advocate is that person in the room that's going to say, yeah, Janet's the one. You've got to give her a chance to do this.
Pamela, you're shaking your head. I think we've touched on something here everyone can relate to.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to that story, and many of you know the name Jim Fleck, and that's who I was speaking of. And I had asked if I could be his teaching assistant when he was teaching at U of T. And so, Robin, you just reminded me I had to prove myself and show year after year that I was capable of being his TA in business government relations, marking those papers. He gave me the opportunity to be in the classroom, and therefore he felt confident enough in me to go to bat for me to get me in the competition. So you're absolutely right. You need that person advocating for you based on what they've seen, and they're willing to spend that political capital.
I'm just going to move ahead here for the sake of time. The book Lean In, reading a lot of men consider it a playbook for professionals, men and women, that it's, if you want to succeed in business and get to the boardroom table, read this book and follow along. It is their playbook. So, Robin, I want to start with you. In your introduction, you had mentioned that the book it's been embraced by groups like far-reaching, not just women, but minorities, men, so it is all-encompassing.
Yeah, there was a great article last week, or the weekend before, in the New York Times Style section, showing how so many men, these were Asian American men in the U.S., in Silicon Valley, who are creating their own lean-in circles. So I think that it is a playbook, but I also just wanted to mention a resource that CPA Canada has just issued, and it's a career navigation toolkit for women, and it is designed for all professional women, I would say, or all women in the working world. It's very universal, and it's a free download from the CPA Canada website, and I'll just give you that URL in case you're interested. It's cica.ca/women, and it's a fantastic toolkit written by a woman named Mary Bennett, who headed up the AICPA, the American Institute of CPA's Women's Initiative Executive Committee. And it's all these things that we've been talking about, these barriers, which the flip side of which are these best practices. So talks about role models, it talks about career advocacy and navigation like mentors and sponsors, it talks about work-life integration, which surprisingly we haven't talked about today. And it talks about, unconscious bias, another thing we haven't really touched on, but just some of the barriers women face and some of the best practices that you as an individual need to be aware of and need to do in order to advance your own career. And as we've talked about, Lean In really addresses what women can do, what we have control over ourselves. Obviously, we need organizations and institutions where we work to embrace this as well. And we've also created a toolkit for organizations, because a lot of CPAs work not just in firms, but they work everywhere in industry and academia and not-for-profit. So we've also created a toolkit for these smaller organizations to help them get it. So if you're interested, cica.ca/women, or come see me, and I'd be happy to give you more information about that.
Okay, let's touch on work-life balance and women and families and trying to do it all in the workplace, at home. Opting out is the latest in the discussion of women and work. Leaving work contributes to the persistent wage gap between men and women. Female workers in 2010 made just 77 cents for each dollar earned by men. That's according to the Institute for Women's Policy Research. So, Pamela, when considering employment after motherhood, Sandberg suggests that women shift the calculations, measure the current cost of childcare against their salary 10 years from now.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think that sometimes when you're looking at going back to work and you're looking at $2,000 a month for daycare and you're making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, you're asking yourself, is it worth it to go back to work? Absolutely, because look at the trajectory 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out. If you make that decision to opt out, you're going to become financially dependent. If you make that decision to opt out, you're going to see that if you try to get back in, it's going to be really difficult. So we always say, WXN, we inspire smart women to lead. We do that by encouraging you not to opt out, to lean in, to come back to work with a network of people who want you to be successful, to build that network. So what does that look like? It starts with your partner. Does your partner support you in your career? Does your partner place a value on you contributing to the household as a full-time wage earner or not? Does he or she make it as easy as possible for you to do that? So does your partner help with the housework? Does your partner work with you to partner on the raising of the children? I thought Sheryl Sandberg put it really well when she said, choose the right partner. Because I think, Kym, if you have the right partner, that partner has a vested interest in seeing you lean in, not opt out, continue on in your career, because they are there to support you. Just like other people in your network, you should have a great group of friends who are there to help you and support you, a partner, influencers that you've mentioned, who are those in your career who are influencers who can help you be successful. So I absolutely espouse the idea of staying in the workforce and enjoying the life that you have, knowing every day you're not going to have great work-life balance. It's impossible to have it every day. But look back on the month. So at the end of every month, I ask myself, okay, for the month of November, Pam, how did you do? This month, not so well, because I've been traveling and I've hardly been home, and my fridge is empty, but Grocery Gateway's coming tomorrow, so that's fantastic. This month, not so well, but next month is going to be really good. And October was really good in terms of work-life balance. So I think we need to be too hard on ourselves and look at that work-life balance weekly, monthly, whatever works for you, but not daily, because you're going to disappoint yourself.
Well, it sounds like to me, and I'll start with you, Robin, that for young women, when they meet their significant other and they have those conversations about whether they want to have a family, religion, where they want a vacation, all of those big conversations before they walk down the aisle with this person, that they should be having this conversation about, guess what, this is where I'm going in my career, and I want to get here. How can you help me, you know, in the home, and so I can have this, I can attain my goal? What kind of support are you giving me? Is that now a crucial conversation to have?
Yeah, along with the conversation about money, of course.
But, there's that, yes.
See if you're on the same page about money. But no, of course. I mean, I think when people come together, it's usually because their values are aligned, right? So I think that that hopefully you choose someone who, you know, does feel the same way that you feel, that, you know, it's not only the right thing to do, that it makes economic sense for your household, that it makes economic sense for the community and the country and everything. And I think it's obviously to the kids' benefit if the husband is involved in the household too. So Cheryl talked about, I love that women have to lean into their careers, but the men have to lean into the households. And I have to say my husband has always been very good that way. He definitely does more than his fair share all the time, and he's happy to do it. He has his own business and he works really hard, but he does make a point of really being involved with my kids. And, you know, you try to sort of divide and conquer, and there's certain things that he doesn't mind doing, like driving my daughter this weekend to Western for the day just to look at a university. You know, and there's things that I don't mind doing, like going to the parent-teacher interviews. So we sort of pick our poisons and the things that we both enjoy, and you definitely need, it's very hard to do it on your own. I mean, I have friends that are single mothers, and it's really tough.
It is 9 o'clock, so we're going to continue, but I know we started late, but we're all very busy and have to get to our workplaces. So I do invite you, if you have questions, please come up to the microphones and we'll start entertaining your questions as well. And if you have questions on Twitter, I will take a look at that. Again, it's hashtag W4W2013. So let's get into the last couple of questions.
Before you do that, can I just add maybe a little bit of a different perspective on just what was said? First of all, the whole wage gap doesn't come from the fact that women step out of their careers for periods of time. It starts from the day that women graduate from university, in that the salaries, there's still up to a 10% gap with women who have the same degrees. And part of it is we don't negotiate for our salaries, and partially it's the choice of occupations that we go into, because women tend to focus more in the lower paying occupations. So that is really important. The second thing is, Lean In is all about, if you want to advance in your career, if you're seeking more senior level positions, I don't think anyone should feel guilty if that's not what they find enriching and satisfying in life. Not all men want to be senior leaders. My husband did not. I did. So I think it's really important to make the choice about what matters to you. And that affects your decision in terms of work-life. I call it work-life integration because, like Pamela, over the years, I mean, balance is something that, unless it's an internal balance, it doesn't happen on a daily basis, but it's all about the choices you make. And then being happy with those choices. Sorry, Rob.
No, that's okay. Sheryl Sandberg also blasts the myth of having it all. We can't be perfect every minute of the day, whether it's our personal life, our work life, at the boardroom table. So I want to ask each of you, what perfectionist attitudes have you dropped in order to find your own contentment, your own success? Claire?
Well, I've accepted myself as who I am, with my strengths and my not strengths, and I have those for sure. And I gave up long ago worrying about being a super mom, because I realized it doesn't matter if the cupcakes come from the corner store or if they come from my kitchen. The kids didn't care. And I've raised two wonderful sons who are doing really well, so I guess it worked out okay in the end.
Robin?
I think for me too, I mean, I'm a very high achieving, goal setting kind of person, and I always like to do well, and I have a good track record. So when I have a setback or a failure, sometimes that was really devastating. And one story I'll share with you is sort of about 5 years ago, out of the blue, I auditioned to be the host of a TV show called Maxed Out. And it kind of came out of nowhere. They had, the season one, they had a host, Aisha Hogan, but the producers didn't like her. And I think I had randomly sent an email to the show and saying I felt like I could add value and contribute. And they brought me in for a meeting, and then they randomly auditioned me. And I was so excited. I wanted this so, so badly. And I was like, didn't want to tell people in case I didn't get it because I would be so embarrassed because I'm used to, doing well and achieving. Anyways, I didn't get it. Alison Griffith got it, a very seasoned, well-known, excellent broadcast journalist with financial background. Anyways, I was so devastated. It really took me out for like a couple of months. I had to regroup and rethink my strategy and how did I still want to try out for other shows, or how did I want to adjust my business plan for myself. And but you know what, it was one of those things where I really learned a lot more about what I wanted, what I didn't want, and now I find when I fail at something, I can keep it in perspective instead of taking it so hard. I keep it in perspective and I use it as a learning experience and hopefully as a way to go on and do something better. And again, I think you asked about confidence. I think it's so important for women to have the confidence to take risks. Because you take a risk and you push your comfort zone a little bit and you do well, and that builds more confidence, and then you're willing to take another risk, and it's very cumulative. And at the end, you end up feeling very good about yourself and self-confident that you're willing to take opportunities where you're not feeling like you have 100% of the skill set required to do that job well. And that's another difference between men and women, is that women are promoted based on past accomplishments, whereas men tend to be promoted based on promise or potential. And that's not fair, and as a result, we end up being so hard on ourselves, like feeling you have to have every box checked to be able to put yourself out there for something. But I say, don't wait to have every box checked. Go for it. You might not get it. I didn't get maxed out, but I learned a lot, and I've gone on to do so many other things. And you got to just take those risks. Women are a lot worse at taking risks than men are.
Well, it's pretty simple. You don't succeed without failure,
Right.
right? Pamela, what perfectionist attitudes have you dropped?
I dropped home baking a long time
As
ago.
have I.
So I dropped that a long time ago, and I love cake mix. And my mom, I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, and she always made cookies and cakes. And when my kids were little, we went to church, and on Sundays they'd have those circles at the front of the church. And one day they were telling a story, and my kids were both in this circle, and the minister asked, so let's talk about making a cake. What are the ingredients in a cake? So you can imagine 300 in church, and this little blonde girl put up her hand and said, sugar. And another little blonde girl put up her hand and said, flour. And one of my guys put up his hand and said, cake mix. Kym, I tell you, I just went like this because 300 people turned around and looked at me in the balcony, and I thought, yes, cake mix, and I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it.
My daughter bakes. That's my. She bakes. She's the baker in the house. So.
I do bake, but I didn't feel the need to have to do it for my kids' school.
There you go. Okay, let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. Women empowerment and raising the stature of women in business are central themes in this book. And let's end it on a high note. I think it would be beneficial for the audience if each one of you would offer one key takeaway to everyone here. My mother always said, you've had a very good day when you've learned something new. So Claire, what piece of advice, what would you like to say to the audience that is a takeaway?
Well, I think it's like, along the lines of what Robin said, it's about never giving up on your dreams. If you want to achieve something, you have to go after it. Do what it takes to get it. Make moves if you have to. Rekindle that passion sometimes when you lose it along the way, but continue to work on your dream or change the dream to another one if that one is not going anywhere. But to never give up. And best of all, as I said earlier, I think you have to really look at what your strengths are and live and leverage your strengths, and don't worry about your weaknesses.
I'll repeat
Robin?
what I already said. Take risks. Definitely, it will boost your confidence. I'm okay operating a little bit where I feel like I'm in over my head because I know that I can do it. So, for example, when I was asked to write my book, A Parent's Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids, I'd never written a book before. But I said to myself, I think I can do this, and I'm just going to try. And I'll get the help I need, I'll get a good editor, and you know, you got to just keep taking risks.
Look after you. So it all starts with you. So my advice would be, you can't be good to anyone else unless you look after you. So what do I mean by that? It means that 150 minutes a week, whatever that looks like, walking, getting to the gym, yoga, being smart about your own health is my takeaway for you.
And please, if there's questions, we would love to hear from you. I will just wrap up by saying, after having met these three, thank you, these from Twitter? Thank you. Okay, these three accomplished women and hearing their resumes, I'm not going to lie, when I met them, I sat there and thought, oh dear God. What am I doing with these women? I am not worthy. So, but after talking with them and reading the book and reading the articles that go along with it, I thought, you know something? What resonates with me is don't be afraid to boast about your accomplishments. Don't be arrogant about it, but have the confidence to take pride in what you've done and tell people, whether it's a mentor or a sponsor or just your girlfriends, tell them about what you'd like to do, what you're striving for, your goals.
And Kym, you're in an amazing position to influence change, being in media. And so, when I looked at your resume, I thought, wow, because you're in a position, having built your career in media, to make a difference when it comes to how media view women. Exactly. So good on you.
Well, we'll see.
But it does show that you can make that difference from wherever you sit. And so if you look at maybe the four of us here, but throughout this room, you're a room full of accomplished women. And that difference can be made from wherever you sit, in an organization, in a family, in a community. It doesn't have to, you don't have to wait for that magic, huge difference. You can make that difference every day by the things you do.
Okay, let's get into some of your questions. And this was actually on the cue cards, but I skimmed over it for the sake of time. Let's go back to it, shall we? What is your take on Sandberg's suggestion that we think of the path to a satisfying career as a jungle gym rather than a ladder? It's an unconventional approach, and it involves risk. Who wants to start?
I'll start, if that's okay. I think she's absolutely right that you can't think of a career as linear necessarily. If you think you're going to start at the bottom, if whatever that bottom is, and go to the top, you're likely going to be derailed somewhere along the line, or it's possible. Because you have to look at where you want to be and what skill sets you need to get there, and they may mean moving laterally. I moved laterally several times. Actually, I changed careers a number of times. I went from academia to government. Never planned it. I never planned it. I was open to possibilities. But you need to look at the skill set. If you want to get to the senior levels of a private sector corporation, for example, and you need operational experience, you have to take the risk, and I suggest earlier in your career, to go and get that operational experience, because you will not get to the positions that require operational experience, and many times they are at the center of power in the corporate world. So you need to look at, what do I need? And you shouldn't hesitate to take a lateral position if it's going to advance your skills. So I think it is like a jungle gym. It's not a linear, life isn't linear, and so you have to look at those complexities.
For me, that sounds like never saying no. Try any job. It's only going to help you move up.
I wouldn't go that far to say never say no. You have to strategically look at what that job entails, and if it's a really bad scene that you might be walking into, you might want to think twice about doing it.
Robin?
I definitely agree with that metaphor of the jungle gym rather than a ladder. The other metaphor, that I really like the idea of, you have your foot on the gas pedal, and you don't always have to be accelerating. You don't always have to be going full out. It's okay at certain times in your life, for the sake of that balance, to let up a little, but don't get out of the car. Stay in the car.
We have a question from the audience. Go ahead.
Kym, you touched on boast about your successes, boast about what you've done well. And Robin, earlier you talked about take credit for what you've done. I think many of us in the audience would like to hear from the panelists, how do you take credit without standing out as being too assertive or too aggressive? Or especially when you have gone beyond the expectation. How do you take credit?
I'll let you start, Pam.
It's a great question.
Yeah. That's why I'm letting you start.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, it's easy because I'm an independent. I work for myself, so I always take the credit for everything I do. But I think that, again, and Cheryl Sandberg does talk about this, there are times where you have to credit your team because you can't do what you do without your team if you work in an organization. But there are times, and I think maybe around promotions or getting stretch assignments, where you really must make sure that the right people know what you've done so that they will consider you, because they're going to consider a bunch of different names probably. There's always a short list. So you want to make sure you're on that short list if it's something you want.
I think it's really important for women to take credit and not be tied into this, because it really hurts us when we don't take credit at the right times and the right places. And that doesn't mean you have to be arrogant about it. But if you're going into performance time and your boss doesn't know what you've done, that's going to hurt you in terms of performance, because you can bet your male colleagues are probably going to have padded what they did. I mean, if you have a team, you can say, I led the team too. Because if you're in leadership, you are leading the team. If you're going for a role as a job, you have to talk about your accomplishments. What did you contribute to making that happen? And when someone praises you for something well done, it's really easy just to say thank you. Don't add that other line, well, it was really nothing, because you can bet your bottom dollar it was something. You worked hard to do it, otherwise you wouldn't be getting that praise. So it has to be selective. You don't have to brag about it, but you have to know when you need to talk about your accomplishments. And this came home to me. I was talking to a senior partner in a firm just a couple of days ago. And she was saying she had a gender intelligent boss, because she said, I put in my performance thing and my boss said to me, that's not really all that you did, rewrite it. And she said, I couldn't. He said, I'm going to rewrite it for you because you did a lot more. But most of us don't have a gender intelligent boss, so you need to think about that.
Question from the floor over here.
Yes, I took part in a discussion over a book called Women Don't Ask. We've been addressing women being assertive, but that book was amazing in pointing out to us that our patterns are so different from men on what we ask for. And it pointed out scenarios where I realized I didn't even think of that. That isn't in my head. That's not what women do. So not only being assertive, but asking for things. It was a really, really good discussion. Obviously, you know about the book.
Yes.
Yeah, that is such a great point. I always say to myself, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly.
And so, when I'm going to develop new business, when I'm going to sit down and do a performance review, in any situation, I always think about framing it as what do I need to ask for? And for the person who I'm meeting, what do they need to ask for from me? So going in a collaborative frame of mind, what am I going to ask for? What are they going to ask for? And what does that win-win look like? And at the end of the day, I think if you put yourself in the other person's shoes, when you're asking, it's asking with the right context to get to the solution that's going to work best for both of you.
So just to repeat, that book is called Women Don't Ask, and there's a companion book called Ask For It. And I also think, I read that book, I found it to be pivotal. Like, I changed the way I did things as a result of reading that book, because women aren't comfortable negotiating for themselves. They're great negotiators on behalf of others because they're so collaborative, but they're terrible at negotiating for themselves because they think that negotiating might damage the relationship. Whereas men don't think that way. They have more of that aggression that they think that you're supposed to negotiate. You would never accept the first offer. It's sort of more natural for them. Great book.
I think it's supported by all the great research that's being done at Harvard now around women in negotiation that looks at how women do negotiate differently than men. And as Robin said, women often negotiate better when they're negotiating on behalf of someone else. So if you think when you're negotiating your salary that you're negotiating it on behalf of your family, then you can probably do a better job of asking for that. But I read both those books as well, and I learned to ask quite a while ago because I realized if I didn't ask for it, I wouldn't get it. And one of the things I caution is you have to ask like you deserve what you're asking for. So it has to be well prepared. If you're going to ask for resources or a promotion, be prepared. Go in there as knowing what it is and why you should get what you're asking for, and make it sound like you deserve it, because you do.
We'll wrap it up with one final question, which I think is, you'll be the final question. How's that sound?
Thank
Because
you.
we'll get everyone back to their offices. So go ahead.
So I had a question. I know earlier in the discussion we talked about legislation essentially forcing more women into higher positions. Do you think that's almost a double-edged sword, indicating that we can't do it on our own, that we need this legislation to force ourselves into those positions?
Well, I think that what's nuanced about this regulatory approach that's great is that it's up to the companies to decide what their diversity policy should look like. So the regulation right now doesn't say you need to have 20% of women in senior management, and it doesn't say you need to have 20% of your board seats held by women. It says, think about it, create a board diversity policy, create a management diversity policy, and create one that works for you. So that's what I like about this, is that it's less forcing women onto boards that quotas do, and it's more look at your own business and make the decisions that make sense for you. So I don't see this piece of regulation as forcing.
I think sometimes, and the Employment Equity Act was an example of how that helped drive it forward in the federal public service and the federally regulated industries, that when you know you have targets and you have to meet them, then the legislation compels to do what you should be doing anyway, because we know that even though there's a tremendous business case out there for why organizations should have more women in diversity, it isn't happening. And even in your report that's coming out, when you look at the mining sector, and a lot of the mining board directors don't see any need for change. That's pretty telling.
Comment, and that I'm a professional coach, and I work with women almost all of the time, and most of them are in transition, every transition you can imagine. And one of the things that I've found that didn't come up this morning, that comes up for me all the time with women at the beginning of their career and at the end, is the question of boundaries. We learn how to ask, we develop self-awareness, but women have a real problem with creating boundaries, and that can be around self-care, that can be around career. We just, for some reason, we have to really sit down and think about what is possible in creating boundaries so we're not burned out. So I wondered if one of you could comment on that.
Robin?
Yeah, and Sheryl Sandberg talks about creating boundaries in the book as well, if you haven't read it. Mary Bennett, who wrote the toolkit that I mentioned, she always says something that I remember, which is, if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, because there's only so many hours in the day. So you have to be very careful about what you commit to, and strategic. If it's career related, you have to be strategic about it, because careers are going to require sacrifice, and you're going to have to give up your personal time and some family time. And if you love what you do, it's not as big a sacrifice, but there are limits. And everyone has to create their own boundaries, and then, be forward about it. Sheryl talks about that when she decided to start going home at 5:30. She was really uncomfortable doing that at the beginning, because she didn't want anyone to question her commitment to Facebook. But once she made it clear that she leaves at 5:30 to be home for dinner, and then she works after dinner, and she set those boundaries for herself, she said she felt better, and people were thanking her for being so transparent about her boundaries.
Except when you look at that boundary, I mean, she still comes back and works at night. I don't like the word sacrifice, because it suggests that you're making a choice that is a sacrifice instead of making a choice that you want to do. And it is all about priorities. So if you're going to put, what are my priorities, and I align my yeses with my priorities, and I put the no's in areas that are not my priorities. So if I'm asked to do some things in the office environment that really don't relate to my advancement or where I'm at the moment, and they may be things that are traditionally what women would do in the office, no hesitation in saying no. Even now, I say where my focus is, and I get asked to do a lot of things, and I say no a lot because it doesn't align with what are the priorities in my life and where I want to make the difference now. So I think that's really important. I've never regarded the time I spent at work as a sacrifice because I chose to be there.
Claire, Robin, Pamela, thank you so much. I hope you all continue to lean in and sit at the table. Thank you.
Thanks, Kym. Thanks,